We're doing something for Sapiens Institute, 25-part series, which we were really focusing on, which will deal with basically the major ideologies, in addition to the major religions in the world, and how to refute each and every single one of them. In addition to that, we'll have sections on Islam, how to prove it, and so on. So this is one of the most comprehensive things we've done. We've packaged it in many different ways in both English and Arabic. In the Arabic kind of Islamic tradition, what you have is we call nadhm, or like these kind of poetry renditions. So we've made it into a poem. One of the scholars, Shafi'i scholars, has helped us. His name is Sheikh Ali al-Khudaymi. And he's made, we've been through, and he's created now this poem, which we refer to as al-Londoniyya. Al-Londoniyya meaning, from the London poem, and in it is like, all of these things, from atheism, nihilism, materialism, etc. It's all there. And what that's intended to do is not only just get to the people, but also to the talabat al-ilm, the students of knowledge, the mashayikh, etc. I know some of them who have actually memorized it now, honestly, or not all of it, but some of it. And, it's gotten some tazkiyah, it's gotten, which is like, the seal of approval from a lot of big scholars now. And we've been marketing it to a lot of major scholars that have seen it, and liked it. And so I was very happy to see that was happening. A lot of stuff was happening in the background. So
what's the objective?
The objective here is two objectives, let's say. To have something which would fit into the wider schema of Aqidah studies, which the main objective of it is dar' shubuhat, or getting rid of the shubuhat, or deconstruction of the major ideologies, and establishing Islam as the major religion. That's the objective. It's a matan, Aqidah matan, just like a Tadmuriyya or a Wasatiyya or al-Hamawiyya, whatever it may be, or a Tahawiyya, whatever it is, same genre, but this is completely different, I feel like, fruit, which is we're trying to deconstruct ideologies. Most of them, if not many of them, are Western. And many of them are Eastern as well, or whatever, and establish Islam as the haqq. It took time. We reviewed it once, twice, thrice. We're now in the process of creating syllabi, and the knowledge circles. I know many people have sent me emails on the knowledge circles. When is it going to start? It's going to be in English and Arabic. I will be sending emails back, inshallah ta'ala, on how and we're going to proceed. But we're going to video all of that stuff. We're going to video it, and we're going to put it on different channels, which I'm sure we'll know about. My channel, potentially Sapiens Institute as well. English and Arabic. So there's a lot of work that's been done in the background.
And this is good because I remember we did this video back some time ago where you were talking about you need to spend longer time learning a subject than actually speaking about it, and you had some ratio as well. I think this is very important, because when, say for example, you put out an answer, then that answer is going to be out of your control. Say afterwards, if you change your mind about it or you think it's not right, so you need to really build a solid foundation in an area and then put out the content. At the same time, I think with social media, one of the issues is that there's too many avenues to explore in terms of the questions that we get. So a poem like this, I'm guessing the objective is to give a foundation so that once that is established, then dealing with these issues is almost not as important because your foundation is strong. That seems to me like one of the objectives. Is that right?
The Shahada, La ilaha illallah, there's negation and affirmation. And we forget that in order to really affirm something, we have to really negate its opposite. And unfortunately, in Aqidah studies and generally now in the Ummah, we just have not had the tools to be able to negate the major ideologies of the West, and not just that of the East, which are competitors to Islam. So in many ways, this poem will be one of a kind. I don't think there's been anything. Actually, I'm pretty sure there's never been anything like this written in Islamic history, even by the major scholars of Islam.
And this is the way you've explained it. This is in a way because of, if you like, in part because of the West, right? So the reason why it's a unique type of poem is it's a poem that's going to deal with contemporary issues that the West has raised against Islam: feminism, Darwinism, scientism, liberalism, and the atheism, and these ideologies. Hence why the uniqueness.
That's right.
Would you also say that it could be also in part due to maybe that in traditional, and we should all have a very good grasp of the different various groups that existed and why
and there is an aspect of that in the poem as well. We'll talk about Shiaism and the Takfirism, Tabdi'ism. That's all in there.
And would you say that some of, like, for example, the things which are in this poem, and which is the poem is omitting some of the things of the past, do you think some of those things are coming back in a way? Like, for example, one of the things I was thinking about is we seem to think of the Mu'tazilites as long gone, but is that really the case? I mean, there's people alive today which you could actually say the Mu'tazilites, in terms of their ideology, they just don't call it that. So do you think that's why? Because it's now coming with a new potent strength. It's almost like a new variant of this type of ideology that is challenging orthodoxy, but it's coming from a Western perspective, as opposed to, if you like, that the original, if you like, virus of this type of thinking came from the East, and then it was subdued, but a new powerful potent one is coming. We haven't labeled it as that, but it is that with Western backing.
Mu'tazilism is to a lesser extent Ash'arism, and to much lesser extent, to be fair, but Mu'tazilism was strongly influenced by Aristotelian logic in aqaid within the school, and it was very powerful because Aristotelian logic was seen as kind of indispensable. Ibn Rushd, or Averroes, his main argument against al-Ghazali was actually that he wasn't Aristotelian enough. That was his argument. That
was like a benchmark.
Tahafut. He wrote, because al-Ghazali wrote a book called Tahafut al-Falasifa, or Incoherence of the Philosophers. Ibn Rushd, or Averroes, he wrote Tahafut al-Tahafut, or Incoherence of the Incoherence. And he was just kind of making an argument for the Aristotelian position. Now that's the power of the Aristotelian school on classical medieval scholarship. You could say the power still is there. Aristotle has by no means kind of gone out of the picture, even though it's been 2,300 years since he's written his books or whatever. But now, as you say, there are challenges which were never dealt with before, because these ideologies were just simply not there. Liberalism, feminism was a very kind of young ideology in the grand scheme of things, and so on.
So just on this, for example, like how feminism is a new ideology. Just before going live, we were discussing about how in Islam, women and orphans are coupled together, and how this would definitely, and especially in your discussions with these feminists who, really do, I would say, get riled up by these types of arguments. They would hate the fact that Islam categorizes women as vulnerable, as a category of people that need to be protected, and that goes against their whole idea of women are just as powerful, and we could do what we want, and this type of thing. And I think that's also something which in the past, wherever you were in the world, you wouldn't get that type of argument, whether it was the Greeks or the mushriks.
You see, this is a good point you're making, but when you really, if you pay close attention to second wave feminist rhetoric, right? I think it's a little bit more complicated than saying that they want them to be heroes. I think the irony of it is that they want them to be victim heroes, which is actually an oxymoron. How can you be a victim hero? You're either being oppressed, which means you are, in a sense, vulnerable. Because when was the last time you had a vulnerable, oppressed person. Heroic or a non-vulnerable oppressed person. So you can't have your cake and eat it both. If they want the oppressor
can I just
to be the man,
can I just challenge that, right? We could say everybody loves the underdog story, right? It's about the guy who was bullied and he was then he became.
Well, I think if you're saying the underdog, already you're admitting that there's a disparity in ability there, isn't
it? So you said second wave. So first wave, and again for the viewers, okay, what do you mean by second wave? What's first wave? What's second wave?
First wave,
and then we can go into.
It's cause based. It was about the vote. Funny enough, this is actually in the poem. This is all mentioned in the poem. But yeah, the first wave was cause based, right? Second wave, we're talking about
it was cause based, and this is the suffragette movement.
Yeah, suffragists and suffragists.
So this was about women working and.
The first wave was more about them getting the vote rather than working. Second wave started to become about equal pay and stuff like that in work, and that's when legislation started in the 60s, from 1963 onwards, kind of passed with Jeff Kennedy and stuff like that. American, there was this kind of symmetrical movement in the UK and Canada and stuff like that. But in addition, then you started to have all these kinds of narratives by feminists like de Beauvoir, notably Simone de Beauvoir and Betty Friedan. And Germaine Greer, who's still active, older woman now, and has come back from her positions. Like, people don't realize that Germaine Greer and Betty Friedan, both of them, have actually retracted a lot of their positions because they realize that it's not. Actually, there's lots of reasons why they did. But
what position did they retract?
So, for instance, like we may have heard in the second wave feministic literature that Betty Friedan famously said that woman is, a slave in a comfortable concentration camp. But she wrote a book called The Second Stage. And in that book, she says that was a bit extreme.
Didn't you write The Second Sex?
No, that was de Beauvoir.
Okay.
The Second Stage was a second book written by Betty Friedan. In fact, in that book, she retracts a lot of her positions. The one who retracts her position probably the most strongly.
Oh, okay. What does Betty retract from? She said the house is
the reason. The comfortable concentration camp
and the yoke of reproduction, and that.
So one thing that she retracted is this. The second thing, she softened her position on the housewife being a slave, and she focused on the fact that she'd done a survey herself. To be honest, her sociological surveys, both in Feminine Mystique and The Second Stage, were very weak. But when she did her survey, she realized that women were basically not happy as a result of the changes in legislation. This is mirrored, by the way, by a huge study, probably the biggest study that's ever been done in history, in Western history, which is in 1970 to 2000, where women were in America and Britain. Oswald, I think the name of the person is, 2000 is the study, and it was a longitudinal study, obviously 30 years. 100,000 women were asked about their happiness levels. And what's notable is a marked decrease in their happiness in the exact times where there's legislation change and in exact times where women started to pursue career as an option. James Tooley, he wrote in his book Miseducation of Women, a very interesting book which I think the viewers should buy. He said that he also mentions things in the very beginning of the book. He mentions, the amount of women that have had panic attacks and, nervous breakdowns, he calls them, right? 60 to 70%, he says. And because of prioritizing the career over the family.
Yeah.
You know what Germaine Greer said? She obviously wrote The Female Eunuch, right, in the 70s. But she wrote a book called The Whole Woman thereafter, maybe in the, I don't know, it's 80s, or I don't know when she wrote it, maybe in the 90s even. And she said something which was shocking and just unbelievable. She was one of the advocates for abortion. She was on the camp of people saying you should never have children. So de Beauvoir said that, right? I think Betty Friedan said that somewhere, but definitely Greer was saying this. And she says something in The Whole Woman, which is so powerful. She says, "I mourn for my unborn children."
Allah.
She goes, "I mourn for my unborn children," meaning she regrets the fact that she can't have children because of her ideology. And then she says in her book, The Whole Woman, this goes into the category of retractions of the second wave feminist. She's one of the big women in terms of big names. She then says something to the effect of, we need to look closely at a full-time woman or a full-time housewife being a legitimate career option.
Wow.
Complete flip. She's a contrarian, the woman. Like even now with the whole LGBT thing. With the whole transgender movement, she's got controversy going on.
Yeah.
The point is that with the third wave feminists, right, with which we can talk about in a second, but this shows you the extent to which the studies and the data shows that this second wave feministic experiment has really been a failure.
Yeah. And the most radical and loudest are usually the ones who come out with these types of arguments against marriage, against children, against, it's almost like there's this pressure. Yeah, there's this pressure. Where do you work? Oh, I work here. Oh, where do you work? Oh, I'm a housewife. Like they've created this type of thing where being it's almost like try and create a restlessness within women, even affecting Muslim women now, where it's like, oh, you're just at home. What are you doing at home? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and this is something very interesting.
But just on that, I mean, if we look at the data, the ones who are at home are much happier than the ones who are at work as a full-time occupation. That's just a fact of the matter. As I say, the Oswald study of 2000, that is the staple study that anyone can look at.
Yeah.
We're talking about 100,000 people, 30 years. That's a longitudinal study. As I say, you can look at James Tudor's book. It's fantastic, brilliant book on this called The Miseducation. Really should look at it. But what I was going to say was, this is a failed experiment, pure and simple, because you're trying to suppress the maternal instinct. You are trying to suppress the physiological thing that makes a woman what she wants to be.
It's a failed abortion.
When you do that, you have all these malfunctions.
Yeah.
That's why there's such backlash literature now, backlash on the feminist movement, because it's failed. And do you know what's really interesting about that study as well? We saw a marked decrease in the happiness of women. But we also saw a marked increase in the happiness of men. Because you know why? Bro, I'll tell you something now that, I don't think I've actually ever made this public, right?
Are you about to say something I'm going to have to take us off live? It's happened a few times where I've had to take...
It is because it is in the best interest, nothing controversial. It's because it is in the best interest of a man, generally speaking, not to commit in relationships where he's extracting his resources. Absolutely. So he's moving from one woman to another, doing what he wants to do.
Not only this, when women say, about happiness, right? So they're saying they're happy at home, and at home, what is it? They're secure, right? They're in this sort of protection. But the feminists, they want women to be basically out of the house. Now, one of the things which I was actually thinking about the other day, the feminists talk about patriarchy, right? And they use this term often. Oh, look at these bunch of men, patriarchy. But the number one thing that they should be pointing out as patriarchal is the sex industry. It's all run by men.
To be fair to them, some of them do. Like, there was something called the sex wars in the 1990s, I believe it was, between Andrea Dworkin and kind of some feminists on the radical side of feminism, who were making active arguments against the sex industry, against pornography even. And
here's the thing, because if they want to say religion is patriarchal, well, religion is basically giving men what they don't want and protecting women. So it's basically like, if it was up to men, I mean, that's why the sex industry, I gave it as the example.
Yeah.
So the women are being exploited. The women are the ones being prostituted, and they're the ones human trafficked. Not even if it's voluntary. It's the fact that, it's the men who are enjoying that. How many men prostitutes are there compared to women prostitutes?
The point you're making here is very clear, that the feminist movement has been in the best interest of men. If you look at the studies, like this Oswald study I'm talking about, that's one example. I'll give you another example, which I thought was a very interesting example. I personally believe Simone de Beauvoir was probably the founding mother of modern day feminism from a philosophical perspective, because she gave it that justification. Not many people know that in her autobiography, right? She was in a relationship with Jean-Paul Sartre, well-known relationship. She says in her autobiography, right? And also James Tudor mentions this in his book, very good book. Once again, Miseducation of Women, for people that want to buy it. She says in her autobiography that she was kind of like preparing her house. I think it was in New York. She was preparing. Look, imagine the mother of feminism, preparing her house, cleaning up furniture, this and that, so that Jean-Paul Sartre the famous existential philosopher can come and live with her, right? And she was doing all these things and whatever. And he gave her the idea of doing the second sex, the main book, right? And as he was giving her the idea, he gave her the epistemological kind of backing for it. He was pressuring her to do so. And you can see in her writing, this is what she says, something to the effect of when she finished writing her book and everything went well, she then started to come, less active in terms of her writing and stuff like that. And he said to her, now you've become what you hated, or like you're becoming like a housewife or something to that effect. And she said, I was so disappointed in him. Do you know what she refers to him as in her autobiography? She refers to him as her superior. Please think about this for a second. I want women to think about this first. Feminists who are women, most of them non-Muslim, I don't mind. Whoever is infected by the feminist movement, we're talking about one of the founding mothers of feminism. She was given the idea to write the major book of feminism that talks about how being in the home is oppressive. And she was given the idea by a man who never committed in a relationship with her, who was, you could even tell from her autobiography, manipulating her. And at the end of it, when she did what she did and she wanted to be in a relationship with him, he was like, you are what she was. And she was referring to him as her superior. So think about this. You've got a woman going home to a man, calling him, you're my superior, you're this and that, writing it in public writings and telling all the other women,
don't accept them as superior.
Can you imagine? It's ridiculous. And this is public. Just think about that for a second. Feminism was, you could even argue, feminism was created by a man. Well, if it wasn't for Paul Sartre, if it wasn't for Sartre, would feminism have taken off in the way that it's taken off? You got two major books, honestly, in the 60s. 1963, you have The Feminine Mystique. But without this book, The Second Sex, would feminism have been what it is in the academy?
And let's look at who benefits, okay? So we have the ideology, but who benefits? That Hoffman guy, whatever his name is, the old guy who used to wear a bathrobe, the guy who was the founder of Playboy, he used to call himself a feminist.
Of course.
Why? Because all of those women who were in his magazines, and he popularized this in the 50s and 60s and whatnot, would they come from the South, from the conservative Bible Belt, where their brothers and their fathers are like, you're not doing that, you're not bringing dishonor to our family? Or would they come from broken homes, from drugs, and from these types of things, or vulnerable women? And there's that woman, Kathy, I forgot her name, Catherine something, right? McKinnon, yeah. She basically challenges this ideology about using women like this, because she says basically they're being exploited.
Yeah, but remember, she says that having sex is rape, something like that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But
she was most radical.
Yeah. So what it is that if you want to call anything patriarchal, then you should call something patriarchal whose implications are in the favor of men. That's what you should call patriarchal.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't call a theistic religion patriarchal when the implications are against men's interests.
Why? Like,
do you understand?
I do understand what you're saying. Absolutely, and this is
that's why the Muslims who sometimes say yes, Islam is patriarchal, and I think I've fallen into. We shouldn't do that. We should say, look, it's not patriarchal and matriarchal because it's God-centric. It's not about.
This is actually a very similar argument to one that Farrell makes, or Farron. I keep making a mistake with his name. Warren Farrell. Yeah. In The Myth of Male Power, which is another classic book that should be in the bookshelves of everybody that wants to know about feminism, right? So, Miseducation of Women by James Tooley, the War of Farron's books, in fact, all of them, not just, even The Boy Crisis. He's written a book recently, a very good book, called The Boy Crisis, talking about the importance of fatherhood. He is coming from a kind of seemingly egalitarian perspective. Yeah. We have to remember that when we're reading his books, but the arguments that he makes are interesting. He basically says this: you got to look at the way we define power. Because what is power? And he defines it as, and in the literature, by the way, we could talk about this, but he himself defines it as the power someone has over their own life. And he says, if we define power in that way, then how much power do men actually have? They're very dispensable. If we look at the history of mankind and civilization, we realize that they're the most dispensable. In their life, they have been very dispensable. Of 11 wars in America, major wars he mentions, I think he wrote this book in the 90s, in the first edition. There was drafts that men were forced to go into war and dispense of their actual physical bodies. Things like that indicate how could that? He says that that's powerlessness.
Yeah.
So if power is defined as control you have over your own life, you having to provide for your family or extract your own resources or pay for their things,
You're a servant.
that's actually a kind of service, or and he gives kind of menial examples of, if you go with your wife or with a woman, even if just believe this, this kind of Western culture, they have boyfriend, girlfriend, they go to the restaurant, the man is expected to pay the chivalry effect, this and that.
Imagine if you split the bill. That would be just...
It's powerlessness, because it's just like the cliche of women and children get off the boat first, in emergency situation. How that's power? That's not power, that's powerlessness.
Yeah.
You are having to dispense of yourself.
Or even, for example, the feminists who say, this is patriarchal, that's patriarchal. Why don't they argue about the patriarchy in the army? And they say, why did so many men die in World War II? Why not equal enough women?
Yeah, that's the argument. That's the argument. Yeah.